Thank you very much for that introduction. And hi, everybody. My name is Rory Maybank. I work for Portsmouth Water, where I'm the project director for the Havant Thicket Reservoir. I'm joined today by Peter Mulder, who's a director at Atkins. Atkins is part of the team acting as design and environmental guardian for the project. This is our first presentation to CIWEM, so thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk to you about the reservoir project. Today, we're going to explain why the reservoir is being built, what our strategy has been to impact on the environment. Peter's going to explain how we've put one part of that strategy into practice with a focus on aquatic wildlife. And then I'll briefly describe some future areas of focus for the project. The reservoir covers a huge number of subject and environmental areas, and we can't really explore all of them today, but I'm hoping there'll be opportunities to come back and give further presentations to CIWEM on different topics that might be of interest to your members. So the Havant Thicket Reservoir is going to be the first new reservoir built in the UK in over 30 years. It's going to be the first reservoir built in the southeast since 1975. So it's not unreasonable for people to ask, well, why do we need a reservoir now? The reservoir is an environmentally led project. And by that, we mean that the reservoir is being built in order to protect globally rare chalk streams, such as the Rivers Test and Itchen. Now, in 2017, Southern Water agreed to reduce abstraction from these rivers by around 80 megalitres a day, a huge reduction in water abstraction for potable water use for customers. They launched a program called Water for Life, and that aims to address this challenge. Like all water companies, we've got targets to achieve a 50% reduction in leakage between 2017 and 2050. And we're also working with customers, with households, with industry, with farmers to reduce water consumption. But those two things combined are not going to be enough to protect the wildlife that depends on these chalk streams. And if we want to protect those habitats, then alternative sources of water need to be found. That's where Portsmouth Water comes into the equation. We're really lucky. We're fortunate to have access to the largest freshwater springs used for potable water in Europe. And our springs in Bedhampton and Havant provide enough water at times of winter when there's been some rain to fill 40 Olympic swimming pools every day. And as you can see from this map, that blue dot at the bottom, that's the location of Bedhampton Springs. So it's actually really close to the ocean. So in winter, most of the water from these springs runs straight out to sea. So we've got a great opportunity to make better use of that water, capturing it in the winter and storing it until it's needed in the summer and at times of drought. That's going to allow us to share more water with Southern Water's customers. So it's using our local supply to solve a regional problem. The reservoir site is 160 hectares in size. That's quite difficult to get your head around, perhaps easier to say. It's a mile long and about half a mile wide. And our environmental strategy was developed in consultation with over 70 different regulatory and local interest stakeholder groups, supported by surveys, which started back in 2005. So we've got a really good idea about the wildlife that inhabits the Havant Thicket Reservoir site and how to look after it. Our strategy for managing impact to the environment has been to eliminate impact where possible through design, to mitigate impact on wildlife through translocation, and to compensate for impact where it is unavoidable. Now, despite the size of the site, our project is actually going to deliver a net gain to wildlife habitats through our environmental strategy. For example, the reservoir site was chosen following a review of over 70 different alternative sites. And we chose this one in particular because of the topography. There's a natural valley, its proximity to the springs, so the carbon impact of building pipelines and for pumping the water up to the reservoir is relatively low. Really importantly, it's a site which is rich in London clay, and also because it had less tree cover than some of the alternative sites that we considered. Now, having all of the clay we need for construction on the embankment site is really important, because that means we don't need to import the clay that we need to build the embankments which will hold the water in place. And so that really minimises the embedded carbon in construction, because we don't have to import huge volumes of material from outside of the site and have the impact that has on carbon emissions, and also, of course, on the roads and local residents. Now, the reservoir will regrettably result in the loss of 12.5 hectares of trees, but we are going to be providing compensation for that by providing over 200 hectares of new and improved woodland and wood pasture. That's going to be provided through a combination of on-site planting, through restoration of southerly forest, which at the moment is mainly sort of pine trees. So we'll progressively return that to broadleaf trees and improve biodiversity there, and also engage in a rewilding project. Now, I'm a big fan of the Archers, and I've been listening to the Archers talking about rewilding projects for years. I'm really excited we're going to be having our very own rewilding project here for the Havant Thicket Reservoir project, working with a local farmer to turn what was previously farmland back into its original condition, so to promote woodland and wood pasture growth over a huge site of 80 hectares. And we're going to be entering into agreements which are in effectively sort of in perpetuity, so agreements which go for 80 years and beyond, to make sure that the wildlife habitats we create there will be there for generations to come. The reservoir will also include a 3-kilometre new wetland habitat along the North Shore. That's going to be a new wildlife habitat for the area, which we're really excited about. And once the reservoir's operational, we'll have a capital grant scheme so that we can continue to provide funding for further biodiversity enhancement projects in the area for many years to come. All of these are going to combine to create an interconnected and rich mosaic of habitats in our local area. Thank you. So we started planting trees and wildlife corridors back in 2019. This is before we had secured planning permission, and we did that not because we had to, because we hadn't received planning permission to do that at the time. We just felt like it was the right thing to do. So we planted over 6,000 trees on the reservoir site with support from volunteers, and created extensive wildlife corridors of hedgerows, so that those had an opportunity to mature, so that when we got planning permission and were ready to start the enabling works and start taking down some of the trees so we could get access to the clay, that some of those environments and habitats had already had a chance to mature. Following planning permission in 2021, in 22, we then went on to start implementing our translocation program. With protected species licenses, we employed professionally trained and qualified ecologists to start the process of translocating dormice, bats, reptiles, and other animals in a managed way, supported by the placement of a huge number of dormouse boxes, bat boxes, and so on in the local area. Now, one of the really exciting things is, as we walk around the site now and look at those early plantation areas, we can see the long grass growing in areas around some of the trees, and you can see wildlife tracks weaving their way through that. So it's clear evidence that these habitats are doing the job they were designed for. Okay, I'm going to stop talking for a bit now and hand over to Peter, who's going to talk to you in a bit more detail about the work to protect our aquatic life.
Thank you, Rory. So, as Rory alluded to, we found ourselves near to Havant, and the location of the site of the reservoir, shown in red here to the top, is within the Hermitage Stream catchment, which flows through the town of Havant and then into Langston Harbour. It's quite a small catchment. It mainly arises from springs to the north and west of the site, and it's mainly not very natural, and I'm talking sort of about the middle and lower reaches here. It's been modified extensively for flood defense purposes, and some of its headwaters, particularly to the west, have over time also been built over by housing and roads. So as a result, in the main, the character of the stream is that it rises and falls very quickly in response to rainfall. Now, although this is technically an impounding reservoir, if we go to the reservoir site itself, the streams leading into the reservoir do not flow for about half of the year, and you can see that in some of the pictures there. They rise and fall as the shallow groundwater does towards the very north of the site. Interestingly, the springs in the woodland are actually quite acidic, meaning they have low pH compared to the rest of the catchment, where the water quality is alkaline, and the springs are alkaline as well. So combined with the absence of nutrient enrichment and pesticides, so the site's been used for a while as a country park with no agricultural activities and so on, the aquatic ecology has developed quite a range of uncommon species indicative of seasonal wetting and drying, and some of them also like acidic conditions. And for the sort of the parted invertebrates that live in the streams, these species can hide in the wet gravels for a lot of the year, and they only come out in winter and spring. Not protected species, as Rory alluded to, with some of the dormouse and other there, but they are considered rare or scarce. So we did undertake, Portsmouth Water have been undertaking monitoring on the site for quite some while, and the importance of that is really key here, where some of the wetter flow periods did get targeted, and these species did get found whilst they're otherwise in the gravels. The reservoir will, within the catchment, regrettably result in the loss of some of these streams underneath the reservoir site, and it's approximately 3 kilometres of streams in total that would be lost there. So whilst we were literally looking to focus on stream recreation in the Hermitage stream catchment, i.e. the same Water Framework Directive or WFD water body, we found that there wasn't the space. So combined with the uniqueness of the local ecology, it was decided that a derogation was required under Article 4.7 of the Water Framework Directive for the scheme to go ahead. And I note that post-Brexit, this is now known as Regulation 19. As part of that process, as part of the tests that is required for the derogation, one should look at all practicable mitigation and compensation measures within the catchment. And we created a long list together with the Environment Agency and discussed this at length. And this included all practical aquatic mitigation measures within the catchment in the first instance, because it was agreed that we should focus on the catchment itself. And a shortlisting process was engaged, and a total of 14 reaches were selected and progressed, and now form part of the scheme going forward. There will be some creation as part of this, but the majority of the work in terms of the total 5.5 kilometre of watercourse length will be improvement work, focusing on improving heavily modified catchment, but also taking opportunity to improve existing headwaters where we can. And the work is undertaken from now onwards, starting with some detailed design first for some of the lowermost reaches, but for those underneath the Havant Thicket Reservoir footprint, we're actually working on it now. And one of these reaches we call Reach 4, and it encompasses the work that relates to the streams and ponds underneath the reservoir footprint. So in 2022, early works were started at the reservoir, and soon these works will start diverting some of the intermittently flowing streams away so that the main working area is dry. So ahead of this, we had to plan for the translocation of some sensitive features. And I mentioned the aquatic invertebrates before, which I'll explain a little bit about, and then I'll cover the plants as well. So first of all, having understood what assemblage is present, we had to find a receptor site. So we undertook surveys across the Hermitage stream catchment and looked at some key criteria, such as also the receptor stream also needed to have intermittent flows, absence of human impacts, similar water quality, similar morphology, shape and form, and also the appropriate permissions from landowners. And whilst we initially found some sites suitable on Hermitage stream, we found that some of the better sites were actually spoken for other developments as well. The issue with most other headwaters in the Hermitage stream was actually water quality, where there is a diffuse pollution and points of pollution happening which obviously would compromise the objectives of this. So we did look slightly outside of the Hermitage stream catchment in the end, and we found a section of stream through Southleaf Forest and also downstream of there, which is managed by the local council. Although they ultimately flow into the River End catchment, we found that there was very good habitat, seasonal wetting and drying, good water quality, including existing communities, which were indicative of that. The land ownership was also resolved, as some land was owned by Portsmouth Water, whilst East Hansborough owned the other reach, and both reaches were already managed for nature conservation purposes. So whilst the translocation was undertaken last year by specialists, this year we'll be looking at some of the follow-up monitoring to determine the success. We've also found some acidic plants. Sorry, I shouldn't say acidic plants. I mean acid-loving plants are indicative of low nutrients, particularly in a pond on the new footprint, which is called Upper Lake. And like the invertebrates, these plants are not protected, but they're quite uncommon. And it's that sort of combination of their sensitivity to nutrients and their sensitivity to, or their preference for a very narrow pH band. That's quite key. Again, we looked at a review of receptor sites, and we actually found that ponds to the northeast of the reservoir would be most suitable. So that's in the woodland, just to the northeast there. And that was mainly as a result of the water quality, but the ponds were not in a good condition. And in particular, they were quite sedimented, but also heavily shaded by conifer trees. And in line with the forestry design plan and also consultation with the landowners there, selective thinning of conifers was proposed, retaining all broadleaves, notably those close to the ponds. There had some unusual mosses growing on them, but particularly focusing on conifers. And one conifer species, Scots pine, was also retained. Some ponds also had invasive species present, and again, a management plan has been put in place for that. So with help from our specialists, including from Royal Kew Gardens, plants were taken from the pond under the footprint in summer last year, and this year we'll be looking at monitoring the success of that work. And back to you, Rory, for a review on the continual future work and improvement.
Thank you, Peter. Now, there has been a video produced of some of the really exciting work that Peter and the rest of the environmental team have been doing to achieve that translocation of aquatic and sort of the macro invertebrates and so on. So if anybody's interested, I think we're posting a link to that video in the comments. So what next? Well, we're not content to stop listening now that we've got planning permission for the project. We recognise that there's a huge range of diversity of opinions and interest in the reservoir. And I think from my reflection, if we can sort of manage that diversity of interest in a way that's inclusive, that gives us the opportunity to innovate and deliver the best project that we possibly can do. And so to that extent, we have had a stakeholder advisory group in place now for many years, and we've actually maintained that and built on it, establishing a number of subgroups that focus on key areas such as recreation, access, the environment, and many more. And through that stakeholder engagement, we've had recommendations made to us for several schemes. And also the stakeholders have helped to mobilise volunteers to support their implementation. Now, those programmes have included a sapling rescue project, which has resulted in over 200 saplings being rescued, sort of small bushes and trees being rescued from areas that were scheduled for tree felling and moving them to a managed area. We've identified 80 young trees which we've saved, ready for translocation at a later date to a new area to add to that 200 hectares of woodland creation that we talked about earlier. We've been rescuing bluebells and also engaging volunteers in controlling sort of weeds and non-invasive species on site. So we're much stronger for engaging with our local community and finding out ways that we can continue to improve the work we're doing to really maximise opportunities for environmental compensation and mitigation during the course of the construction works. We're also engaging our supply chain to look for ways that we can innovate. So when we got our planning permission for the project, we got a hybrid planning permission. What that means is that some parts were full and detailed planning permission, like the dry side of the embankment, while others were outline. And they were for our contractors to develop detailed designs and to work with us to secure full and detailed planning permission. Now, our pipeline contractor has identified an alternative route and construction methodology for the pipeline, which will supply water from Bedhampton Springs to the reservoir. The current route in this drawing is shown in red. Part of that goes through the streets of Havant, with sort of cut and cover, if you like, being the construction technique. They're proposing a technique which relies more on microtunneling. Those are machines which go under the ground and drill a hole, and you jack a concrete pipe into that hole and then thread your pipeline through that sort of concrete pipeline. We're currently putting that out for non-statutory consultation right now. We're going to be having drop-in sessions in Havant and doing some online stakeholder briefing sessions so that we can get people's feedback ahead of a formal planning application later this year. But we're really excited about this because we believe that having a shorter pipeline and one which involves more tunnelling and less cut and cover could reduce carbon emissions by just under 20%. So that's really exciting for us. We're also keen to ensure that good practice and lessons learned are captured during the course of the project and shared for the benefit of all. We've got an educational subgroup that's focused on enabling local schools to get the maximum benefit out of learning opportunities from the project. It's amazing to think that a project that's got a duration of about 10 years will see some children go from they're sort of starting their primary school experience right the way to the completion of their academic sort of progress while the project is taking place. So lots of opportunities to support education and learning with a network of schools at a number of different levels of academic stages of education. We've also signed a memorandum of understanding with the University of Portsmouth, and they're working with us to help to deliver a learning legacy. So during the course of the project, we're going to be publishing papers with professional institutions and on our website, and I'm sure there'll be many more opportunities for talks such as this in the future. And so as a part of that, we hope that the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management will welcome us back to reflect on some of these learnings. Well, that brings us to the end of our presentation. So thank you for letting us talk to you today. And we'll now be very happy to take any questions that you might have.
Many thanks, Rory and Peter. Fascinating subject. There are some questions in the Q&A, and I'll just remind everyone again that if you have a question, please pop it there. But the first question was from Merlin Davis, and they're asking, was there any designations attached to the land involved in the reservoir site compensation areas?
So that's a really good question, and it's really important that we don't invest in land and compensation measures as a short-term measure. They really need to be sort of considered in perpetuity. So our planning permission requires us to ensure that any land agreements we entered into with third parties as a part of that 200-hectare commitment extend for the duration of the reservoir project. So the reservoir agreements that we have with Southern Water extend for 80 years. And so equally, the agreement that we'll enter into for the rewilding project will be effectively a lease with an 80-year commitment and the option to renew and extend that.
Thank you for answering that one. Another question we have here is about any local resistance on the plans, and it mentions that the comment section on YouTube is open. And has that thrown up any sorry, tongue twister there, any still can't say it.
Well, so that's
Any
okay, 'cause
issues?
we don't want any controversy on this project. So, yeah, we you know, the public support for the project at the time of planning was really tremendous. So, you know, there were independent surveys carried out at the time of the planning application, which indicated, you know, 90% of people surveyed were supportive of the reservoir project. And, you know, that's really down to the tremendously hard work of, you know, sort of the team at Atkins and Portsmouth Water and our other advisors, and the engagement of that sort of 70 strong stakeholder community over a lot of years, so that as we developed the plans, they weren't just our plans that we were kind of doing to people. They were shared plans which, you know, that local interest groups and regulatory bodies felt comfortable that they could buy into. So they were developed in a collaborative way. But of course, you know, we're never going to be able to please everybody all the time. And there was a protest group that formed a formal opposition to the project called Stop the Chop. And, you know, by its name, I think you can guess, you know, that was primarily focused on concerns around the numbers of trees that needed to be felled in order to enable the project to be built. And they went through a process of crowdfunding to raise money to see if there was a legal challenge to the planning application process. Now, it would have been really easy for us to keep them at arm's length, and, you know, just to focus on getting the job done. But as I said, you know, we really felt strongly that that diversity of opinion is something we could draw upon. So we invited Stop the Chop to attend our stakeholder advisory group meetings so we could be transparent about our plans. And we invited them to come and talk to us about, you know, what their concerns were and whether they had ideas of ways in which we could improve our proposals. And so that's what I was alluding to when I had that sort of stakeholder engagement and volunteering slide. Because the program to do the sapling rescue and to identify over 80 trees to be retained during tree felling for translocation later before construction started, that was their idea. And I'm really glad that we got support of Southern Water and Portsmouth Water's boards to make the investment necessary to make that happen. And as a result of that engagement, the Stop the Chop group have now changed their name to Havant Thicket for Nature. We're really proud to be working with Havant Thicket for Nature, and I think we're a much stronger project for listening to and having different opinions being expressed during the course of the project.
It's a really refreshing answer. Thank you for that. We've also got a question here about emphasis being given to bird boxes and bat roosts, and how important are bees in the equation?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, bees are everything, aren't they? And butterflies too. Yeah, the reason why we had so many bat and dormouse boxes is because you know, that the work is covered by regulations for protected species. So we needed to apply for protected species licenses to ensure we were doing our best to protect those particular sort of wildlife groups. And yeah, we're really excited about the dormouse, because the dormouse is an exceptionally rare animal. But you know, we were mindful that there was potential to find dormice on site. And so, yeah, before the tree felling sort of started, we put up hundreds of these boxes around the site. And sure enough, during the course of the project, we found 2 dormouse. So one dormouse was seen in one part of the site scurrying down the wildlife corridor, which we created back in 2019. So that was like, yes, the wildlife corridor is doing its job to provide natural routes for wildlife to move to new environments, which we've been working with the likes of Forestry England and Havant Thicket to improve that environment to create receptor sites. But we also found a dormouse in one of the boxes, and we relocated that to a receptor site. But you know, none of this translocation work is done as just a one-off and put things to a new place and ignore them. We actually have a commitment to do regular monitoring and surveying with high frequency in the short term, and then with reducing frequency over decades to come, to make sure the translocation is a success and the environments we create are appropriate. And so we had thermal imaging cameras looking at the dormouse in the box that we translocated, and to our surprise, it found a mate. So we're actually a dormouse matchmaking agency as well as a reservoir construction company now. So the team were really excited about that. So I think that's the first part of the conversation. But no, it's absolutely right to say that our translocation isn't just limited to those protected species. We're also very mindful about the impact on different birds, on reptiles, on the aquatic wildlife that Peter was talking about. And so, over the course of the last year, we put up special screens that divided the site into a number of grids. So there's some very low level sort of sheets with pegs to keep them in place. And so that enabled the ecologists to go into those areas, search for the wildlife that we wanted to translocate, and then move those to new areas. But the screens were kept in place so that reptiles didn't have the opportunity to move back into those areas that have been cleared. But before we even started that process, gosh, if I go back further, one of the challenges is to bring the height of the grass down, because reptiles love long grass. And so we need to cut the grass down. And rather than using lawn mowers and tractors to cut the grass, over a period of about a year, we actually used a much better environmental approach. We got loads of sheep on site. So we got sheep to heavily graze the site to bring the level of the grass down, again, to encourage wildlife to move into new areas. But birds, butterflies and bees are a hugely important part of that ecosystem. And so as we're working with the receptor sites, such as that 80-hectare rewilding project, we're very keenly interested in creating an environment that supports not just the trees and the wood pasture, but also grasslands as well, because there are some birds that prefer grasslands, that the butterflies and the bees enjoy the grasslands too. And so a part of that is going to be using our experience of working with farm owners to improve catchment and biodiversity quality in our catchment area, and that includes creating something called dew ponds. So these are ponds which are not fed by streams, but they're sort of waterproofs of hollows, which capture rainwater, and they almost become like ephemeral ponds. So they then help to support insect growth, which then sort of promotes the bees and the butterflies, but also helps to provide support for that ecosystem, including a growing and diverse bat population. So it's all linked, it's all connected, and it's all important.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer there. Another question in the Q&A: who will be responsible for operating the reservoir? Will it be Portsmouth Water or Southern Water?
It's Portsmouth Water. So we have a bulk supply agreement in place with Southern Water, through which we'll provide water supplies over an 80-year period, for which the reservoir is effectively that water bank that we can draw down from in order to provide the supply. But the reservoir is very much it's our planning application, and it's our reservoir to design, build, and operate.
Thank you. So definitely Portsmouth Water. How will this help stop bills increasing by less than 1% within AMP7, or is this project primarily looking into AMP8, 9?
Crikey, that's a technical question, and also a sort of an economics question, which I'm more of a project director, so I'll answer as best I can. The first point to note is that the regulatory determination provided by Ofwat will ensure that Portsmouth Water customers do not pay for the reservoir. This is a reservoir that's been designed and built for the benefit of Southern Water's customers. And so Portsmouth Water customers, whether they get water from us or wastewater services from Southern Water, will not be affected by the cost of this project. That cost is entirely borne by Southern Water's potable water customers. And the structure of the deal is such that we are raising the finance for the design and construction, and then the cost of the scheme will be recovered through our bulk supply agreement to Southern Water, and then through Southern Water to its customers once the reservoir comes into operation. And at the moment, the reservoir is planned to go into operation towards the end of 2029. So it's a future AMP issue rather than a current AMP issue.
Great, thank you for that.
I should add, James, actually, sorry, just one other point is that the reservoir has been sort of demonstrated to the satisfaction of Ofwat and Southern Water that the reservoir provides value for money when compared with alternative schemes. Bedhampton Springs really is the southeast's last free and sustainable source of fresh water. Once we've used that, the only other sources are the sea and wastewater recycling. And so, this is a much better value for money scheme than any of the alternatives. But I'm sure we're going to see water companies around the country turning to recycling and desalination as we consider the impact of global warming and population growth in the many decades to come.
That links nicely into the next question, which was asking, it was once considered that the reservoir would store recycled water. Is this still the case, or will it only store water from the spring?
That is a really good question. So the planning permission that we have in place is singly for the water that fills the reservoir to come from Bedhampton Springs. And that is the baseline scheme. Now, water recycling, it's a well-established and widely used technology, which is being considered by Southern Water to provide a brand new source of clean and safe drinking water. And Southern Water are investigating the potential for the use of recycled water to enhance the performance of the reservoir, which would involve providing that highly treated and safe water as a means of topping up the reservoir to enable more water to be drawn down at times of drought and in summer conditions. Now, the initial investigations, we understand, predict that recycled water would actually be cleaner in many ways than the water which comes from our springs. We are working in consultation with Southern Water to ensure that that's the case. But Southern Water would need to take that scheme through a planning application process, which is entirely separate to the one which we've got in place right now. And our support to the scheme would be for it to only go ahead if we are 100% satisfied that the recycled water meets our strict water quality standards and has got no negative impact on our community and environmental commitments, particularly around the wetland. So our scheme, which has planning permission, which we're talking about today, only filling using water from Bedhampton Springs. There may be a further scheme to look at enhanced use in decades to come, but that's subject to an entirely separate planning application process.
I think you've answered this next question, or you can't really comment on it because it's about Southern Water, but just to check, the question is, can you comment on the Southern Water plans for recycling water from Bud's farm so the reservoir won't be fed just from springs or streams?
Yeah, I think I've just answered that question.
Yeah.
So at the moment, our scheme is just to be fed with planning permission from Bedhampton Springs. The potential use of recycled water will be subject to a separate planning application process. It's been led by Southern Water, and we are making sure that we're very closely engaged with that in order to make sure we protect the quality of the water and impact on the environment.
Great. And what were the key activities, actions undertaken to gain Ofwat support?
Oh, crikey! I think that's almost the subject of another presentation. But put very briefly, in order for the scheme to start, the scheme needed a price review, so a determination by Ofwat, which was granted as a special determination in 2019. And then there was a review carried out of that with Ofwat, with support from Southern Water, during the course of the last year, which resulted in a further and final determination being made by Ofwat just last month. So you can read all about that on Ofwat's website. And yeah, we're tremendously grateful for the support we've had from Southern Water and also from Ofwat in going through that governance process, which has ensured that we've got the right budget set for the project with the right levels of financial security for customers to ensure that the scheme's deliverable.
There's a few more questions to get through, Rory, but given the time, maybe we'll just do a couple more and then wrap things up. So a question here about planting trees ahead of planning permission. Is there anything that needs to be considered to allow these to be included as part of the offsetting process?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I think that's possibly an area where sort of town and country planning guidance would benefit for some further sort of consideration in the years to come. And we've had similar conversations on this with other regulatory bodies that have a say in this, because we recognise that there's a huge benefit for developers, not just of reservoirs, but of sort of housing and other projects, to take the risk to invest in environmental mitigation and compensation measures ahead of planning permission. So we needed to have extensive discussions with our local planning authorities to agree whether or not those schemes could be taken into account as part of our 200 hectare strategy. The conclusion was that it was appropriate that it should be because the planting was done purely for sort of mitigation and compensation of the impact of the reservoir, and that the investment was made early to ensure that the wildlife could actually get the benefit from that early planting.
Thank you. And are there any discussion or options such as floating wetlands or inclusion of other nature-based treatment that could potentially offer benefits to water treatment and further environment ecological benefits?
Oh, crumbs, I'm sure there's always got to be opportunities. So I think the important thing to note is that the scheme, we started with an outline biodiversity mitigation and compensation strategy. Over the course of the last year, with support from others, we've developed a detailed environmental mitigation and compensation strategy that's been approved by the planning authorities. But this is still just the start of a process. So the next year will see us progress our designs in increasing detail, and through our subgroups and through our planning sort of determination process, there are going to be further opportunities for us to consult with stakeholders and local interest groups on our detailed designs, and there'll be opportunities for people to have their say, and we'll continue with an open mind and open ears within the terms of the regulatory allowance we've been set by Ofwat to consider ways in which we can continue to innovate and improve our plans over the years to come.
Thank you. And we better wrap things up, but I'll just ask this last question. Besides the opposition regarding the group Stop the Chop, were there any other obstacles that may not have been considered regarding the planning constraints?
Absolutely. COVID. We started our planning application process just at the outbreak of COVID, which was, has been devastating to many people individually, and a real challenge to businesses which needs to be inclusive. And so we were perhaps one of the earlier projects of this sort of size and scale to implement an online stakeholder consultation process. And I must say, I joined the project after that consultation process had been executed, but I gather that it was one that was delivered, exceptionally well. That stakeholders were really happy with sort of this change in ways to engage people, to take part in stakeholder consultations on Teams. I guess for many people on the call today, this is commonplace, but it presents a huge risk to the programme at the time. But at the end of the process, I think the project won an award for outstanding stakeholder engagement. So I think the team responded to that in a really agile way. And I think actually that's becoming the blueprint for many major planning consultation processes now, because for many people, it provides a much more accessible way to take part and make sure that their voice is heard.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. And thank you so much, Rory, Peter, for your presentation and fielding all those questions today. And thanks to everyone else for making this event. And please remember to look at the SciWEM website for future events from both the Central Southern Branch and SciWEM as a whole. Many thanks. Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.